The rain came down hard that night in Millbrook, Arizona, the kind of rain that turns desert dust into mud and makes the neon signs blur like watercolor paintings. The alley behind Mulligan's bar smelled of motor oil and old regrets, and the sound of a Harley-Davidson engine echoed off the brick walls before going silent. Creed Maddox stood in the center of that alley, his leather jacket slick with rain, his gray beard catching droplets that rolled down like tears he'd never shed. 65 years on this earth had taught him to recognize trouble before it arrived. But tonight, trouble had been patient. Tonight, it had waited. Three shapes emerged from the darkness. Big men, young enough to be stupid, old enough to be dangerous. The one in front, Creed recognized him, Vic Maloney, local trash who'd graduated from petty theft to something darker. "You should have stayed out of it, old man," Vic said, his voice echoing in the narrow space. He held a tire iron loose in his right hand, tapping it against his palm like a metronome counting down to violence. Creed didn't move. His eyes, pale blue, the color of winter sky, took in every detail. 3 against 1, no witnesses. The Harley was 15 feet behind him, his Colt 1911 in the saddlebag. Might as well have been 15 miles. "I don't recall being in anything," Creed said, his voice calm. 40 years of staying alive in bad situations had taught him that panic was just another way to die faster. The second man laughed, a sound like gravel in a garbage disposal. "That's the problem with you old bikers. Think the whole damn town belongs to you." Creed's hand moved to his belt, a subtle shift. Not for a weapon, he didn't have one, but muscle memory from a different life, a different war. His fingers touched the buckle, the one with the Ranger tab etched into brass that had turned green with age. "I'm going to give you boys one chance," Creed said. "Walk away. Tell whoever sent you that Creed Maddox doesn't scare easy, and he doesn't negotiate." Vic's grin widened. "Ain't here to scare you, old man. Just here to make sure you stop asking questions about things that ain't your business." They moved forward. Creed's body tensed, weight shifting to the balls of his feet. Ranger training from 34 years ago flooded back like muscle memory written in bone. He could take one. Maybe 2 if he was lucky. But 3. A shape materialized from the shadows behind the 3 men. At first, Creed thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the rain and the flickering neon. But then it moved, and he saw her. An old woman bent with age, dressed in layers of ragged clothes that hung off her frame like burial shrouds. A beggar. Millbrook had a few, drifting through town like tumbleweeds, invisible to everyone who mattered. She shuffled forward, one hand raised. "Get lost, Grandma," Vic said without turning around. "This ain't your concern." But the old woman didn't stop. She raised her hand higher, fingers arranged in a specific pattern. 3 fingers up, thumb and pinky crossed. A simple gesture that meant nothing to Vic and his friends. But to Creed, it meant everything. His breath caught in his chest. His heart, which had been beating steady despite the danger, suddenly hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break free. That signal, that exact configuration of fingers, Alpha 6, the designation of a unit that had ceased to exist 34 years ago in the sand and fire of Desert Storm. A unit of 6 soldiers who'd been sent on a mission that officially never happened, to accomplish objectives that were never recorded. 5 of those 6 soldiers were dead. Creed had buried them himself, when he could find enough pieces to bury. He was the only survivor. So who the hell was this old woman? And how did she know a hand signal that only 6 people in the entire world had ever learned? Vic finally turned, irritation crossing his face. "I said get..." The old woman's other hand came out from under her coat. It held a Sig Sauer P226, and she held it like someone who'd been born knowing how to kill. "Drop it," she said. Her voice was different now, not the croak of an old beggar, but the command of someone who'd given orders when orders meant the difference between living and dying. The tire iron hit the wet pavement with a clang that echoed like a church bell. Walk, the old woman said. They walked. Fast at first, then running when they hit the mouth of the alley and realized they'd just been outmaneuvered by someone they dismissed as worthless. Creed stood frozen, rain soaking through his jeans, his mind trying to process what his eyes had just seen. The old woman lowered the pistol. No, not lowered. Executed a perfect, tactical, ready position. Muzzle down but ready to rise in a fraction of a second if needed. She looked at him. Her eyes, even in the darkness, even under the brim of a filthy baseball cap, were sharp, intelligent, alive in a way that contradicted everything else about her appearance. "You're getting slow, Maddox," she said. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain and the night like she'd never been there at all. Creed stood there for a long moment, listening to the rain drum against the dumpsters and the distant sound of his Harley's engine ticking as it cooled. His hand was shaking, not from fear. He'd faced down worse than Vic Maloney and walked away. No, he was shaking because of that signal, because of what it meant. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, a door he'd sealed shut 34 years ago had just been kicked open, and all the ghosts he'd locked behind it were pouring out. 36 hours earlier. The Arizona sun rose over Millbrook like a judgment, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise. Creed Maddox stood in the open bay of Iron's garage, a cup of black coffee in one hand and a wrench in the other, watching the light creep across the empty lot where he parked the bikes. The garage was his kingdom. 3 bays, tools that were older than most of the men who used them, and the smell of motor oil so deeply embedded in the concrete that it had become part of the foundation. This was where he made sense of the world, one engine at a time, one problem with a clear solution. Not like the other problems, the ones that didn't have repair manuals. "Morning, boss." Creed turned to see Flint walking across the lot, his Harley's engine still ticking from the ride over. Flint was 62, built like a fire hydrant wrapped in leather, with a beard that looked like it had been stolen from a Viking, and a habit of saying exactly what he thought, which had gotten him punched more times than he could count. But he was loyal. In Creed's world, that counted for more than social graces. "Flint," Creed said, nodding. "You're late." "I'm retired military," Flint said, grinning. "I'm allowed to be late. It's in the contract we signed when we left the service. Right there in the fine print. You will never be on time for anything, ever again." Creed almost smiled. Almost. "The Brennan kid's bike is in Bay 2. Carburetor's flooded. Should be an easy fix." Flint's grin faded. "We're still working on Brennan vehicles?" "Money spends the same, no matter whose pocket it comes from." "Yeah, but that family," Flint shook his head, "they own half this town, boss, and they didn't get rich by being nice people." Creed took a sip of coffee, bitter and hot enough to burn. "I know exactly how they got rich. That's why I charge them double." Flint laughed, a sound like a rock slide. "Fair enough." The morning passed the way mornings always did. Engines came apart, got cleaned, went back together. Creed's hands worked while his mind wandered, following the same paths it had followed for years. Thinking about the garage, about the club, the Hells Angels chapter he'd been part of for 20 years, about the town, slowly dying like an old man who'd forgotten how to give up, about the things he tried not to think about. Around noon, the bell above the garage door chimed. Creed looked up from the transmission he'd been rebuilding and saw a woman standing in the doorway, backlit by the sun so he couldn't make out her features at first. Then she stepped inside, and he recognized her. Harper Morrison, early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a server's uniform from the diner down the street. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept, or both. "Mr. Maddox," she said, her voice shaking, "I need your help." Creed set down the wrench he'd been holding. In all the years Harper had lived in Millbrook, she'd moved here 5 years ago, trying to escape something she'd never talked about. She'd never asked him for anything. Not a loan, not a favor, not even a ride when her car broke down. People like Harper didn't ask for help unless they were out of options. "What happened?" Creed said. Harper's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand, angry at herself for showing weakness. "It's Declan, my son. He's missing." Creed felt something cold settle in his chest. Declan Morrison, 12 years old. Good kid. Worked part-time sweeping floors and organizing tools here at the garage after school. Smart mouth, quick hands, and a way of looking at the world like he was trying to figure out how it all worked. "How long?" Creed asked. "2 days. The Sheriff Keller, he says they're looking, but—" Harper's voice broke. "Mr. Maddox, something's wrong. Declan wouldn't just run away. He's a good boy. He wouldn't do this to me." Creed walked over to the small office at the back of the garage. It wasn't much. A desk buried under paperwork, a filing cabinet that had been old when Nixon was president, and a wall covered in pictures. Most of them were of bikes. Some were of the club, the brothers who'd ridden with him over the years. But there was one picture that was different. 6 soldiers in desert camouflage, standing in front of a helicopter that looked like it had been through hell. Young faces, hard eyes. The kind of picture taken by people who knew there was a good chance they wouldn't all make it home. Creed looked at that picture every day, a reminder of promises made and promises kept. Of the 5 men in that photo who trusted him to keep them alive, and how he'd failed. He pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk and took out a small notebook. Old school, no computers, no phones, just paper and ink, and the knowledge that some things were too important to trust to the cloud. "Tell me everything," Creed said. Harper talked for 20 minutes, and Creed listened. He'd learned a long time ago that listening was more important than talking. People revealed things when they thought you were just a sympathetic ear. Declan had been acting strange for about 3 weeks. Jumpy, nervous, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to be following him. Harper had asked him about it, but he'd brushed it off. "Teenage stuff," he'd said. "School drama." Then, 2 days ago, he'd left for school in the morning and never came back. His phone went straight to voicemail. None of his friends had seen him. The school said he'd been marked absent. Sheriff Keller had filed a missing persons report, but there wasn't much to go on. No witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Just a kid who'd vanished like smoke. "Did he have any enemies?" Creed asked. Harper shook her head. "He's 12. What kind of enemies could a 12-year-old have?" Creed didn't answer that. He'd seen enough in his life to know that age didn't matter when it came to people hurting each other. "What about you?" he asked. "Anyone who might want to hurt you through him?" Harper's face went pale. "You think someone took him? To get at me?" "I think we need to consider every possibility." Harper was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she shook her head. "No, I left all that behind when I came here. My ex-husband, he doesn't even know where we are. And I don't have anything anyone would want." Creed wasn't so sure about that, but he let it go for now. "All right, I'll ask around, see what I can find out." "Thank you," Harper said. I don't know who else to ask. The sheriff says he's doing everything he can, but Sheriff Keller's a good man in a bad position," Creed finished. "I know. Don't worry, we'll find Declan." It was a promise he had no business making, but he made it anyway, because sometimes people needed to hear a promise more than they needed the truth. After Harper left, Creed stood in the garage, staring at the picture of Alpha 6. 6 soldiers, 5 dead, 1 alive. Promises made, promises kept. He picked up his phone and made a call. Sheriff Boone Keller had been Creed's friend for 40 years. They'd gone through basic training together, served in the same unit during Desert Storm, and come home to Arizona to try and build something resembling a normal life. Boone had become a cop. Creed had become a biker. Different paths to the same destination, trying to keep order in a world that didn't much care for it. They met at the diner on Main Street, the same booth they'd been meeting at for 20 years. Boone looked tired. The kind of tired that came from too many years seeing too much bad and not enough good to balance it out. "Creed," Boone said, sliding into the booth. "I know why you're here, and the answer is I'm doing everything I can." "Didn't say you weren't," Creed replied. "But you and I both know everything I can doesn't always mean everything that needs to be done." Boone sighed. "The kid's been missing 48 hours. No ransom demand. No witnesses. No evidence. It's like he just vanished." "Kids don't just vanish. Someone took him, or he ran. And Harper says he wouldn't run. Harper's his mother. Of course she thinks he wouldn't run." Boone leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "Look, I've got 2 deputies and a budget that won't cover coffee, let alone a real investigation. I'm doing what I can with what I have." Creed studied his old friend. There was something Boone wasn't saying, something hovering behind his eyes like a shadow. "What aren't you telling me?" Creed asked. Boone was quiet for a long moment. The diner buzzed around them, the clink of silverware, the hiss of the grill, the murmur of small-town conversations that had been happening in this exact spot for 50 years. "Off the record?" Boone said finally. "We don't have records, Boone. We just have conversations." Boone leaned forward, dropping his voice. 3 weeks ago, we had a body turn up. Homeless guy, out in the desert near the old copper mine. Beaten to death." Creed felt his pulse quicken. "You think it's connected to Declan?" "I don't know. The guy was a transient. No ID. No one claimed the body. We buried him in the county cemetery with a marker that says John Doe and a date. Case closed." "Except it's not closed, is it?" Boone shook his head. "There were details that didn't sit right. The way he was killed, it wasn't random. It was personal. Angry. And there were tracks at the scene. Multiple people. I put in a request to investigate further, but I got shut down." "By who?" "By someone higher up than me. Got a call from the district attorney's office. Very polite. Very clear. Focus on crimes that matter to the community, Sheriff Keller. Not every dead vagrant needs a full investigation." Creed's jaw tightened. "Someone's protecting whoever did it. That's what I think. But thinking it and proving it are 2 different things." Boone leaned back again, his face etched with frustration. "You know who owns most of this town, Creed. You know who's got the money to make calls like that. The Brennans." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Beautiful and terrible, like most things in the desert. "If you're thinking about going after the Brennans," Boone said quietly, "don't. Thaddeus Brennan Sr. owns the judge, half the city council, and probably the governor's ear. You go after him, you won't just lose, you'll disappear." Creed stood up, dropping a 20 on the table. "I'm not going after anybody, Boone. I'm just going to ask some questions." "That's what I'm afraid of." The sun had set by the time Creed got back to the garage. The building was dark except for the single light he'd left on in the office, a yellow glow that made the place look even more run down than it was. He walked through the bay, past the Harley he'd been working on earlier, and into the office. The picture of Alpha 6 stared at him from the wall, those 6 young faces frozen in a moment of time that felt like a different universe. Creed sat down at the desk and opened the notebook again, started writing. Declan Morrison, missing, 48 hours. Homeless man, murdered, 3 weeks ago. Connection? He stared at the words, trying to make them form a pattern. In Ranger training, they'd taught him that chaos was just order waiting to be discovered. Every problem had a solution. Every mission had a path to completion. But sometimes the path led through darkness you couldn't see the end of. A sound at the front of the garage made him look up. The bay door was still open, and standing in the entrance, backlit by the streetlights, was the figure of an old woman. Ragged clothes, bent posture, a beggar by all appearances. But Creed's hand moved to his belt anyway, touching the empty space where a weapon would be if he'd been carrying one. The woman shuffled forward, moving with the careful gait of someone whose bones hurt with every step. She didn't speak, just moved into the light, and Creed got his first good look at her. She was small, thin to the point of frailty, with skin weathered by sun and wind until it looked like old leather. Her hair was gray, streaked with white, hanging in matted strands from under a baseball cap that had probably been red once, but had faded to a color that had no name. But her eyes were wrong for someone who looked like she did. They were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who missed nothing. "We're closed," Creed said, keeping his voice neutral. The woman didn't respond. She moved closer, her gaze sweeping the garage like she was cataloging every detail. When she got to the office, she stopped, and her eyes locked onto the picture of Alpha 6. She stared at it for a long time. Too long. "Can I help you with something?" Creed asked, standing up now, positioning himself between her and the desk. Old habits. Never let a stranger get too close to your position. The woman looked at him, reached into the pocket of her coat, and Creed's muscles tensed, ready to move, and pulled out a small piece of paper. She set it on the desk and turned to leave. "Wait," Creed said, but she was already shuffling back toward the door, moving with that same painful gait, disappearing into the night like a ghost that had delivered its message. Creed looked down at the paper. It was old, yellow with age, torn at one edge, and drawn on it in faded pencil was a rough map. A building, rectangular with specific markers that indicated doors, windows, structural details. At the bottom, 2 words written in block letters: basement, midnight. Creed's blood ran cold. He knew that building. Everyone in Millbrook knew it. It was the old Brennan Copper Company processing plant, shut down 15 years ago when the mine played out. Now it sat on the edge of town like a monument to better days that were never coming back. He turned the paper over. On the back, drawn in the same faded pencil, was another symbol. Small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But Creed had been looking for it, in one form or another, for 34 years. It was the unit insignia for Alpha 6, a design so specific, so classified, that it had never appeared on any official documentation. Only the 6 members of that unit had ever seen it, 5 of whom were dead. Creed's hands were shaking again. He grabbed his leather jacket from the back of the chair, checked the Colt 1911 in his waistband, loaded, one in the chamber, safety on, and walked out to his Harley. The engine roared to life, echoing through the empty lot. Creed sat there for a moment, his mind racing. This could be a trap. Probably was a trap. Someone who knew about Alpha 6, using it to lure him out. To finish what Vic Maloney had started in that alley. But if there was even a chance, even the smallest possibility, that the old woman knew something about Declan, about the murder, about any of this, Creed twisted the throttle and rode into the night. The Brennan Copper processing plant looked like something out of a nightmare. Rusted metal, broken windows, graffiti sprayed across walls that had once been painted company colors. The desert had been trying to reclaim it for 15 years, and the desert was patient. Creed killed the engine 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot. The moon was up, casting everything in silver and shadow. His boots crunched on gravel and broken glass. Midnight. The paper had said midnight. Creed checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes. He circled the building once, eyes scanning for movement. Nothing. No cars, no lights, no sign that anyone had been here in years. At 11:55, he found the entrance to the basement. A metal door rusted shut, or so it looked. But when Creed pulled on it, it swung open smoothly. Recently oiled hinges. Someone had been here. He drew the Colt, safety off, finger outside the trigger guard, moved down the concrete steps into darkness that swallowed the moonlight whole. The basement was massive. Support pillars held up the ceiling. Old equipment sat abandoned. Conveyor belts, processing machines, things Creed didn't have names for. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness. "Declan?" he called out. His voice bounced back at him from a dozen directions. No answer. He moved deeper into the basement, the Colt sweeping arcs in front of him. Ranger training had taught him how to clear a room, how to move through darkness, how to stay alive when every shadow might hide a threat. But no training could prepare you for what came next. In the far corner of the basement, in a small room that might have been an office once, Creed found him. Declan Morrison, 12 years old, tied to a chair with zip ties, a gag in his mouth, his eyes wide with terror. But alive, breathing, conscious. Creed was moving before his mind caught up with his body. He crossed the distance in seconds, dropping to one knee beside the boy. "Declan, it's okay, you're safe now. I've got you." He pulled out his pocket knife, started cutting the zip ties. Declan was shaking, tears streaming down his face, making sounds behind the gag that might have been words or might have been just pure relief. The first zip tie snapped, then the second. "Almost there, kid. Just hold on." The sound of a safety clicking off froze Creed mid-motion. "Well, well," said a voice from the darkness. "Looks like the old biker's got a soft spot after all." Four shapes stepped into the dim light filtering through the broken windows above. Creed recognized three of them, Vic Maloney and his two friends from the alley. The fourth man was older, heavier, wearing an expensive suit that looked ridiculous in an abandoned copper plant. Creed didn't recognize him, but he knew the type. Management. The kind of person who gave orders and watched other people get their hands dirty. "Let the kid go," Creed said, his voice calm despite the Glock 19 pointed at his head. "This is between you and me." Vic laughed. "Oh, it's definitely between us, old man. You and me and the fact that you couldn't mind your own damn business. Declan's got nothing to do with whatever this is about." "That's where you're wrong," the man in the suit said. He had a voice like gravel wrapped in silk. "The boy saw something he shouldn't have seen. And now, unfortunately, so have you." Creed's mind was racing, calculating angles and distances. 4 guns against his 1. Declan in the line of fire. No cover, no backup. Bad odds. But he'd faced bad odds before. "What did he see?" Creed asked, stalling for time. "Something that's going to stay buried," Vic said. "Just like you." The gun in Vic's hand started to rise. And that's when the old woman stepped out of the shadows behind them and said, in a voice that could cut glass, "Lower your weapons. Now." She held a Sig Sauer P226 in a two-handed grip that was textbook perfect. Her stance had shifted from the shuffling beggar to something else entirely. Something military. Something dangerous. The 4 men spun around, but the old woman was faster. "I said lower them. I won't ask again." For a moment, nobody moved. The basement was frozen in a tableau of violence, waiting to happen. Then Vic made his mistake. He tried to bring his gun around. The old woman put 2 rounds in the concrete at his feet before he could complete the motion. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. "Next one goes through your kneecap," she said. "Then your friend's, then his. I can do this all night, boys. Can you?" The guns hit the floor. "Kick them away." "Good. Now on your knees, hands behind your heads." They complied, moving slowly, carefully. The man in the suit was sweating now, his expensive facade cracking. The old woman kept the gun trained on them while Creed finished cutting Declan free. The boy collapsed into his arms, shaking, crying, 12 years old and trying to be brave. "It's okay," Creed whispered. "I've got you. You're safe." "They killed him," Declan sobbed. "I saw them. They killed that man and I filmed it and they found out and—" "Shh, we'll talk later. Right now we need to move." Creed stood, lifting Declan with him. The old woman hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The gun in her hands was as steady as stone. "We're leaving," Creed said. "Agreed. Cover the exit." They moved as a unit. Creed first, Declan behind him, the old woman backing out last, keeping the 4 men covered until they were up the stairs and out into the night air. Creed's Harley was where he'd left it. He sat Declan on the seat behind him, felt the boy's thin arms wrap around his waist in a death grip. The old woman materialized beside them. "There's a sheriff's cruiser 2 blocks south. Get the boy there. Sheriff Keller is waiting." "How did you—" Questions later. "Move now." Creed started the engine, looked at the old woman one more time. "Who are you?" She met his eyes. In the moonlight, he could see her face clearly for the first time. The weathered skin, the hard lines carved by time and violence. And something else, something familiar in the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. "Someone who made a promise a long time ago," she said. "Same as you." Then she was gone, fading back into the shadows like she'd never been there at all. Creed twisted the throttle and rode toward the lights of Sheriff Keller's cruiser, Declan holding on behind him, the night air cold against their faces. Behind them, in the abandoned copper plant, 4 men were trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. And somewhere in the darkness, an old woman who wasn't quite what she seemed was watching, waiting, keeping promises that were older than the scars she carried. The night was far from over, but for now, Declan Morrison was safe. And Creed Maddox had more questions than answers, starting with a hand signal that only 6 people in the world had ever known, 5 of whom were supposed to be dead. The fluorescent lights in Sheriff Keller's office buzzed like dying insects. Creed sat across from his old friend, watching Boone pour coffee into 2 mugs that had seen better decades. Through the glass partition, he could see Harper Morrison holding her son, Declan, wrapped in a blanket despite the Arizona heat, his face buried in his mother's shoulder. The boy was alive, safe. That was what mattered. But the cost of that safety was just beginning to reveal itself. "You want to tell me what the hell happened out there?" Boone said, sliding one of the mugs across the desk. His voice was level, but Creed could hear the tension underneath. 40 years of friendship taught you to read between the words. "Found the kid where I was told he'd be. 4 men guarding him. Things got complicated." Complicated. Boone leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "Creed, I've got Vic Maloney and 3 other men sitting in my holding cells, claiming they were assaulted by some crazy old homeless woman with military training. You know how that sounds? Like the truth. Like a story nobody's going to believe." Boone rubbed his eyes. "I can hold them for 48 hours, maybe. But without evidence, without the kid willing to testify about what he saw—" "He's 12, Boone. You can't put him on a stand against the Brennans." "I know that, which means in 2 days, those men walk. And when they do, they're going to come after you. After the boy. After anyone who got in their way." Creed took a sip of coffee. It was terrible, burnt and bitter, the kind of coffee that came from a pot that had been sitting too long. He drank it anyway. "Then we have 48 hours to find evidence they can't walk away from." "We don't have anything. The boy's phone was wiped. The body from 3 weeks ago is already buried. And even if we had something, you think it matters? The Brennans own this town, Creed. They own the judge who'd hear the case. They own the district attorney who'd have to prosecute it. They don't own you." Boone's face hardened. "No, but I've got 2 deputies, a budget that wouldn't cover a traffic ticket, and a boss in the state capitol who'd replace me tomorrow if I became inconvenient. I'm doing what I can with what I have. It's not enough. It's never enough." The office fell silent except for the buzz of the lights. Outside, night was giving way to dawn, the sky turning from black to navy to the color of old bruises. "The woman," Creed said finally, "the one who helped me get Declan out. You get a look at her?" "By the time I got there, she was gone. Just you and the kid." Boone paused. "Who was she?" Creed thought about the hand signal, about the Alpha 6 insignia, about eyes that had looked at him with recognition that went deeper than just knowing his face. "I don't know," he said, which was true in its way. He didn't know. He just had suspicions that didn't make any sense. But she knew things she shouldn't have been able to know. Like what? Like where to find me, like how to clear a room, like signals that were classified 34 years ago. Boone's expression shifted. They'd served together. He knew about the missions that didn't appear in official records, the operations that had been erased from history even as they were happening. You think she was military? I think she was a lot of things, and I think she's been watching me for a while. That's a comforting thought. Yeah. Creed finished his coffee and stood. I'm going to take Declan and Harper somewhere safe, somewhere the Brennans can't find them. And then what? Then I'm going to find out what Declan saw, what got that homeless man killed, and who's been pulling the strings. Boone stood as well, moving around the desk. Creed, listen to me. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. The Brennans aren't just rich, they're connected. They've got reach that goes all the way to Phoenix, maybe farther. You start a war with them, you won't win. Maybe not. Creed headed for the door. But I'll make sure they remember they were in a fight. He walked out before Boone could respond. Through the partition, he caught Harper's eye and gestured toward the exit. She stood, helping Declan to his feet, and they followed him out into the parking lot where his Harley sat under the sodium lights. The sun was coming up now, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often were. Mr. Maddox, Harper said, her voice hoarse from crying. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. He looked at Declan. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed but clear, scared but not broken. You did good, kid. Stayed calm. Stayed alive. That's what matters. They killed him, Declan said. His voice was small but steady. The homeless man. I saw them do it. I know. We're going to make sure they answer for that. But right now I need to get you both somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't think to look. Harper's face went pale. You think they'll come after us? I think they'll try, which is why we're not going to be where they expect. 20 minutes later, they were pulling into the Irons garage. Creed killed the engine and helped Harper and Declan off the bike. The garage was dark, the bay doors closed, everything locked up tight the way he'd left it. Except for the figure sitting on the steps leading up to the office, the old woman. In the morning light, she looked even more weathered than she had in the darkness. Her clothes were torn and stained, her face mapped with lines that spoke of hard years and harder choices. But she sat with a posture that was too straight, too military, and when she looked up at their approach, her eyes were alert. Creed's hand moved to his waist, but she raised her hands, palms out, no weapons. We need to talk, she said. Her voice was different now, not the croak of a beggar, but something else. Something that carried authority, even when it was quiet. Inside, Creed said. He unlocked the office, ushered Harper and Declan in first, then turned to the old woman. You've got 5 minutes to tell me who you are and why you've been following me. She stood, joints popping, and walked into the office. In the better light, Creed could see details he'd missed before. The old clothes were a disguise, but not a perfect one. Her hands were wrong, calloused in specific ways, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime handling weapons. And there, just visible at her collar, was the edge of a scar. The kind of scar that came from interrogation, from torture, from someone taking their time with a blade. She looked at the picture of Alpha 6 on the wall, stared at it for a long time. Captain Hollis Vaughn, she said finally. Alpha 6, 1991. We were briefed on a target in southern Iraq. Intelligence said it was a weapons depot. It was a trap. Creed felt the floor drop out from under him. His hand found the edge of the desk, steadying himself. Hollis Vaughn died in that trap. I was there. I saw the building come down. Nobody could have survived. Nobody was supposed to survive. That was the point. She turned to face him, and for the first time he could see past the disguise, past the weathered skin and the gray hair. He could see the woman she'd been 34 years ago. The mission was betrayed before we ever got on the helicopter. Someone wanted Alpha 6 eliminated. We were getting too close to something, asking too many questions about where weapons were going, who was buying them, Which officers were getting rich off black market deals? That's impossible. We were vetted. Everyone on that mission was cleared at the highest levels, which is exactly why we were dangerous. We had access. We had authorization. We could go places and see things that would have been buried if anyone else had asked. Hollis moved closer to the picture, her finger tracing the faces. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Sergeant Daniel Cross, Corporal James Rivera, Specialist Kyle Morrison, Specialist Thomas Bradford, all dead within 30 seconds of the explosion. You survived because you'd gone to check the perimeter. I survived because I was in the rear vehicle when the bomb went off. Creed's mind was racing. 34 years of believing he was the only survivor. 34 years of carrying that weight. If you survived, why didn't you come back? Why let everyone think you were dead? Because the people who set that trap weren't done hunting. They wanted Alpha 6 gone for a reason. When I made it out, I started digging. Found out the betrayal went higher than we thought. Officers, defense contractors, people with enough power to make me disappear if I came forward. She pulled a chair out and sat down heavily, like someone who'd been standing too long. So I disappeared on my own terms. New identity, new life, stayed off the grid, and I watched. Watched what? You, the others who survived, making sure the people who killed our team didn't come back to finish the job. Harper, who'd been listening in silence with Declan pressed against her side, spoke up. What does any of this have to do with my son? Hollis turned to look at her. Everything, Mrs. Morrison, because the man your son saw murdered 3 weeks ago was investigating the same people who betrayed Alpha 6, and he was doing it because he recognized one of them. Who? Creed demanded. Hollis reached into her coat, slowly, carefully, and pulled out a worn photograph. She laid it on the desk. It showed a man in a military uniform, full dress, medals on his chest, the insignia of a colonel. Creed recognized him immediately. Colonel Thaddeus Brennan, the old man's father. The very same. He was the one who authorized our mission. He was also the one who made sure we walked into that trap. 20 years of black market weapons deals, selling equipment to whoever would pay, routing money through shell companies and offshore accounts. We were about to expose all of it, so he buried us instead. Brennan's been dead for 15 years. But his son isn't, and his son inherited more than just money. He inherited the network, the connections, the whole corrupt system his father built. Hollis tapped the photograph. Thaddeus Brennan Jr. has been running the same schemes his father did. Defense contracts, mining rights, anything where there's money and government oversight is light. The homeless man your son saw killed, his name was Emmett Maddox. The world stopped. Creed heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's not possible, he said. His voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. My brother Emmett died 15 years ago. Afghanistan. His unit was hit by an IED. No, Hollis's voice was gentle now. Sad. Your brother Emmett survived Afghanistan. Barely. He came home with PTSD so severe he couldn't function. The VA failed him. His family, your family, tried to help, but he disappeared. Went off the grid. Became one of the invisible ones. The homeless veterans nobody wants to look at because they remind us of promises we broke. Harper's hand found Creed's arm, steadying him. He didn't remember sitting down, but he was in the chair now, staring at that photograph of Colonel Brennan like it held answers he couldn't quite reach. How do you know this? He managed. Because I've been tracking the Brennans for 34 years, watching, waiting for an opportunity to bring them down. 3 months ago, I found Emmett. He was living rough, out in the desert near the old mining sites. He didn't remember much, but he remembered you. Talked about his brother, who rode Harleys and fixed engines, and always knew how to make things work right. Hollis paused. He also stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. Old documents, buried in one of the abandoned mine offices. Records from Colonel Brennan's time in the military. Evidence of the weapons deals, the money laundering, all of it. And they killed him for it. Vic Maloney and two others. Caught him in the desert, beat him to death, made it look like random violence against a homeless man nobody would care about. Creed stood up. The chair fell backward, clattering on the concrete floor. Declan, what did you film? The boy looked up at him, eyes wide. I was out riding my bike. Near the old mine. I heard shouting and I hid. I saw them, 3 men. They were hitting someone, over and over. And when they stopped, the man wasn't moving anymore. I didn't know who he was. I just knew it was wrong. So I filmed it on my phone, thought I'd give it to the sheriff. But they saw you. Declan nodded. One of them looked up right as I was leaving. I ran, got home and tried to figure out what to do. Then a few days later, one of them, Vic, he came to the diner where my mom works. He knew. I could see it in his eyes. He was watching me. So I tried to delete the video, but it was too late. They already knew I'd seen. Harper pulled her son closer. Why didn't you tell me? I was scared. I thought if I told you, they'd hurt you too. Hollis stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the garage bay. The video is gone. Declan's phone was wiped clean before you found him. But that doesn't matter anymore, because I have something better. She pulled out a small USB drive from another pocket. Everything Emmett found, everything Colonel Brennan did, financial records, communications, names of everyone involved in the weapons deals. Enough to bring down not just the Brennans, but the entire network. Creed took the drive, turning it over in his hands. So small, so much weight. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Which authorities? Hollis's smile was bitter. The local sheriff who's outgunned and outmaneuvered? The district attorney who's on Brennan's payroll? The state police who've been told to look the other way? The system is designed to protect people like the Brennans. Going through official channels would just get the evidence buried and me killed. So what's your plan? Same as it's always been. Find someone who can't be bought. Someone with enough reach and enough integrity to make sure this goes public. Someone who won't let it get buried. And you think I'm that someone? No, but I think you know how to fight a war that can't be won through conventional means. You're a ranger. You're Hell's Angels. You've spent your whole life operating in the spaces where official rules don't reach. She walked back to the desk, picked up the photograph of Colonel Brennan. The question is, are you willing to do what needs to be done to get justice for your brother? Creed looked at the USB drive, at Hollis, at Harper and Declan, refugees in their own town because they'd seen too much. He thought about Emmett, his little brother, the kid who'd followed him everywhere, who'd enlisted because Creed had enlisted, who'd come home from war broken in ways that medicine couldn't fix. The brother he'd thought was dead for 15 years. The brother who'd actually been alive, suffering, alone, invisible, right up until someone decided he was a liability that needed to be eliminated. Yeah, Creed said, I'm willing. Hollis nodded. Then we need to move fast. You've got maybe 24 hours before the Brennans figure out where you are. Before they come with enough force that you can't stop them. We need to make those hours count. What do you need? Your brothers. Every Hell's Angels chapter you can call in. Because we're not going to win this fight alone. Creed pulled out his phone, started making calls. By noon, the garage was full. Flint had been the first to arrive, limping from the shoulder wound he'd taken but refusing to sit down. Then came the others. Bull, a 58-year-old former Marine who'd done 3 tours in Iraq and had the scars to prove it. Old Johnny, 67, who'd earned his name by being the oldest member of the chapter and the meanest when he needed to be. Wraith, Pike, Diesel, names that belonged to men who'd lived hard lives and weren't afraid of adding to them. 15 men in total, sitting on bikes or leaning against walls, all of them wearing the same patch on their backs. Hell's Angels, Millbrook chapter. They'd come because Creed had called. That was all the reason they needed. Creed stood in the center of the garage, Hollis beside him, and told them everything. About Alpha 6, about the betrayal, about Emmett and the murder, and the evidence that could bring down the Brennans. When he finished, the garage was silent. Then old Johnny spoke up, his voice rough as sandpaper. So what you're telling us is we're going up against the richest, most connected family in the county, the people who own the law, the courts, and probably half the state government. And our plan is to what? Politely ask them to turn themselves in? No, Creed said. Our plan is to make them irrelevant. We can't fight them in court, but we can fight them in the court of public opinion. We make this so public, so loud, that they can't bury it. We give this evidence to every news station, every newspaper, every blogger and journalist who'll listen. We flood the zone until there's no way to spin it. Bull cracked his knuckles. And when the Brennans send their people after us, then we do what we've always done. We stand our ground and we protect our own. Flint stood up from where he'd been sitting. Boss, I'm in, whatever you need. One by one, the others nodded, made their commitments. 15 men against an empire. Bad odds. Impossible odds. But Rangers didn't believe in impossible, and neither did Hell's Angels. All right, Creed said. Here's how this is going to work. They spent the next 4 hours planning. Hollis knew the Brennan properties, the security systems, the patterns of the guards. She'd been watching for 34 years. She knew their weaknesses. The plan was simple. They'd hit 3 locations simultaneously: the Brennan estate, the company headquarters, the county records office. At each location, they plant copies of the evidence, broadcast it live on social media, make sure it was replicated and distributed before anyone could stop them. It was risky. It was dangerous. It would probably end with some or all of them arrested or worse, but it was the only chance they had. As the sun started to set, painting the garage in shades of orange and red, Creed stood outside smoking a cigarette he'd bummed off Flint. He didn't smoke anymore, hadn't in 20 years, but tonight felt like a night for old habits. Hollis joined him, moving with that same careful gait that hid the warrior underneath. You know this might not work, she said. The Brennans have weathered scandals before. Money buys a lot of forgiveness. Maybe, but it doesn't buy back a reputation once it's gone, and it doesn't bring back the dead. Is this about justice or revenge? Creed took a long drag, let the smoke burn his lungs. Does it matter? It might, to you. Later, when this is over, and you have to live with what you've done. I've been living with what I've done for 34 years, surviving when my team didn't, coming home when Emmett couldn't, building a life while my brother was dying on the streets. He flicked the cigarette away, watching the ember arc through the twilight. I don't know if this is justice or revenge, but I know it's necessary, and I know I'm the only one who can do it. Hollis was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, Captain Vaughn would have been proud of you, the man you became. Captain Vaughn is dead. No, she's just been waiting, for 34 years, waiting for the right moment to come back. Hollis smiled, and for the first time Creed could see the woman she'd been before the scars and the gray hair. Maybe we both have been. Inside the garage, someone started an engine, then another. The sound built, 15 Harleys roaring to life, a symphony of chrome and defiance. Creed walked back inside, swung his leg over his bike, felt the familiar vibration as he turned the key. Hollis climbed on behind him, her grip steady despite her age. You remember the Alpha 6 motto? She asked. Creed smiled. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he smiled. Death before dishonor, victory at any cost. Then let's go remind the Brennans what happens when you dishonor the dead. They rode out into the Arizona night, 15 bikes in formation, headlights cutting through the darkness like judgment finally arriving. Behind them, the garage stood empty. The picture of Alpha 6 still hung on the wall, 6 young faces staring out at nothing, waiting for promises to be kept. Ahead of them, the lights of Millbrook glowed against the desert sky, a town owned by one family, a town about to learn that ownership had limits. And somewhere in between, in the spaces where light met shadow, Maddox's ghost rode with them, waiting for peace that could only come from justice. The war was coming, and this time there would be no survivors among the guilty. The Brennan estate sat on 200 acres of prime Arizona real estate, a monument to wealth built on the bones of men who trusted the wrong people. Creed could see it from a mile away, lit up like a casino, every window blazing against the desert night. Security lights swept the perimeter in automated patterns that Hollis had memorized weeks ago. They'd stopped the bikes a half-mile out, engines silent, 15 men checking weapons and equipment in the darkness. Creed could feel the tension coming off them like heat. This was it, the point of no return. "Radio check," he said quietly into the comm unit Hollis had provided. "Military grade, encrypted. The kind of gear that shouldn't have been available to civilians but was, if you knew the right people." "Team 2, copy." That was Bull's voice from the company headquarters downtown. "Team 3, copy." Old Johnny at the county records office. "Team 1, ready." Creed looked at the men around him. Flint, Pike, Diesel, Wraith. Warriors who'd followed him into hell before and would do it again without question. Hollis stood beside him, no longer disguised as a beggar. She'd shed the ragged clothes for tactical gear that fit her, like it had been waiting 34 years to be worn again. In her hands was an AR-15 that she handled with the easy familiarity of someone who'd carried one through actual war. "1 hour," Creed said. "We go in, we plant the evidence, we broadcast it live, and we get out. Anyone tries to stop us, we don't engage unless absolutely necessary. This isn't about body count, it's about exposure." "And if Brennan's people don't see it that way?" Flynn asked. "Then we adapt." Creed checked his Colt one more time. Full magazine, one in the chamber. "But we don't start it. We're not the bad guys here." "Could have fooled me," Pike muttered, but he was smiling. Pike always smiled before things got violent. It was unsettling. They moved forward on foot, using the darkness and the terrain the way rangers had been trained to do. Low crawls through brush that tore at clothes and skin. Patient movement that 8 minutes, but kept them invisible. The estate's security was good, but it was designed to stop casual trespassers, not people with military training. The fence came up fast, 12 feet of wrought iron topped with decorative spikes that were probably also functional. Hollis had the layout memorized. 2 guard posts at the main gate, roving patrols every 15 minutes, cameras covering the obvious approaches. But there was a blind spot on the eastern wall where landscaping created shadow. They'd have 30 seconds to get over the fence before the next patrol came around. Creed went first, using a collapsible ladder that Diesel had strapped to his back. Up and over, landing in a crouch on manicured grass that probably cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. The others followed in silence, professionals doing professional work. Inside the grounds, the estate was even more impressive. Spanish colonial architecture, all terracotta and white stucco, with a fountain in the courtyard that featured some Greek god Creed didn't recognize. The kind of place that screamed money and power. The kind of place that had been built on blood. They split up. Flint and Pike toward the main house, Wraith and Diesel to the guest quarters where Thaddeus Brennan Sr. kept his office. Creed and Hollis to the security center, a small building disguised as a gardener's shed, but actually containing the servers that ran the estate's digital infrastructure. The door was locked. Hollis produced a pick set and had it open in 15 seconds. Inside, the shed was bigger than it looked, temperature controlled, humming with the sound of cooling fans and hard drives spinning. "Beautiful," Hollis whispered. She pulled out a laptop, connected it to the main server. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing commands that meant nothing to Creed, but apparently meant everything to the system she was hacking. "How long?" he asked, keeping watch at the door. 2 minutes for access, 5 more to upload everything and lock them out of their own system. Outside, Creed could hear voices. The patrol. Right on schedule. He pressed himself against the wall, hand on his Colt, breathing steady. The voices passed, faded, gone. Done, Hollis said. Everything's uploading to the cloud. Multiple mirrors. Even if they bring this whole building down, the evidence is already out there. Team 2, status? Creed said into the comm. In position, Bull responded. Office is clear. Planting the package now. Team 3? Records office secured, old Johnny said. You were right about the night security. One guard, half asleep. He's taking an extended break in the bathroom. Copy. Execute in 3, 2, 1. The world lit up. Not literally, but metaphorically, as 15 different live streams suddenly went active across every social media platform that existed. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of them broadcasting from different locations, all of them showing the same thing: documents, financial records, communications between Colonel Thaddeus Brennan and weapons dealers from 3 decades ago, bank transfers that traced dirty money through shell corporations, names of officers who'd been paid to look the other way, evidence of contracts that had sent American soldiers to war with faulty equipment while someone got rich. And more recently, records showing that Thaddeus Brennan Jr. had continued his father's work. Mining rights obtained through bribery. Environmental regulations ignored through payoffs. Workers injured or killed in accidents that were swept under rugs, lubricated with money. And finally, a video. Grainy, filmed on a phone from a distance, but clear enough. 3 men beating someone to death in the desert. The timestamp showing it was from 3 weeks ago. The location data embedded in the file showing it was on Brennan property. The audio was tinny but audible. Someone shouting, "He saw the documents! He knows about the old man!" And another voice, Vic Maloney's voice, responding, "Then we make sure he doesn't tell anyone." Creed watched it on Hollis's laptop screen. Watched the view counts climb. 100, 1,000, 10,000. The algorithm was already picking it up, feeding it to people, spreading it like wildfire. "It's done," Hollis said quietly. "There's no stopping it now." That's when the alarms went off. The estate's security system erupted in sound and light. Sirens wailing, floodlights blazing. Creed heard shouting from the main house, doors slamming, the sound of people mobilizing. "All teams, extract now," Creed ordered. "Rally point Alpha." They ran. Not panic, but fast and purposeful, using the chaos as cover. Creed and Hollis made it to the fence, scrambled over, dropped back into the desert scrub on the other side. Behind them, he could hear engines starting, vehicles moving. The Harleys were where they'd left them. Creed swung onto his, Hollis behind him, and they roared away into the night. In his mirrors, he could see lights from the estate, could see vehicles giving chase. But Harleys knew these roads. They'd ridden them for years. And the people chasing them were security guards making hourly wages, not soldiers willing to die for a cause. They reached the rally point, an abandoned gas station 5 miles from the estate, and found the others already there. 15 bikes, 15 riders, all accounted for. "Team 2? Creed called out. Bull emerged from the shadows, grinning. "Clean extraction. Security showed up right as we were leaving, but we were already ghosts." "Team 3? Old Johnny limped over, favoring his left leg but otherwise intact. "County Records Office is going to need a new filing system. Might have accidentally broken a few cabinets on our way out." Creed nodded. "Good work. Now we—" His phone rang. Not the encrypted comm unit, his personal phone. The number was blocked. He answered it anyway. "Maddox." The voice on the other end was cultured, smooth. The voice of someone who'd never had to raise it to get what he wanted. "I have to say, I'm impressed. That was quite the coordinated effort." "Brennan." "The same, though I prefer Thaddeus. We're going to get to know each other quite well over the next few hours, so we might as well be on a first-name basis." Creed felt ice in his veins. "You've got nothing to say that I want to hear." "Oh, I think I do. You see, While you were busy playing commando at my estate, some of my people were visiting your garage. Lovely place, very authentic. And we found the most interesting guests hiding there. No. A woman named Harper Morrison and her son, Declan, 12 years old, quite brave from what I understand. He put up quite a fight when my men came in. Creed's hand tightened on the phone so hard he thought it might shatter. If you hurt them, you'll what? Release more documents? Too late, they're already out there. And yes, it's going to be inconvenient. My lawyers are already spinning it, claiming everything is fabricated, that you're a disgruntled veteran with a grudge. Some of it will stick, but not all of it. Thaddeus paused. Which is why we need to discuss terms. There are no terms. I disagree. Here are mine. You come to me, alone. You bring that old woman who's been making my life difficult, and you turn over any additional evidence you might have. In exchange, I let the woman and her son go, unharmed. You're going to let them go out of the goodness of your heart. No, I'm going to let them go because they're worthless to me. The boy's testimony is inadmissible without the video, which you've already released. The mother knows nothing. They're just leverage. But you and the old woman, you're loose ends that need tying up. Hollis was listening, her face carved from stone. She shook her head. Don't do it. Where? Creed asked. The old copper processing plant, where you found the boy. Fitting, don't you think? 1 hour, you're late. I start removing fingers. The line went dead. Creed lowered the phone, looked at the men around him. Brothers who'd followed him into hell, who'd stood with him when standing meant probable death or imprisonment. He's got Harper and Declan, he said. Wants a trade, me and Hollis for them. It's a trap, Flint said flatly. Of course it's a trap. So we don't go. We have to go. He'll kill them. Bull stepped forward. Then we all go. 15 against however many he's got. Better odds than we've faced before. No, Creed shook his head. This ends with me. It started with Alpha 6, with a betrayal that killed good people and let evil ones prosper. I'm not dragging you all into it. Too late, boss, old Johnny said. We're already in it. Have been since you called us. That's what brothers do. He's right, Hollis said quietly. She'd been silent, thinking, calculating. But going in guns blazing is suicide. Brennan will have 20, maybe 30 men at that plant. All armed, all willing to shoot. We need a different approach. What kind of approach? Hollis smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. The kind that uses what we have instead of what we wish we had. Brennan thinks he's got all the power. Let's show him he's wrong. She laid out the plan. It was insane. Probably wouldn't work. Had more holes in it than a target at a shooting range. But it was better than nothing. 30 minutes, Creed said. We move in 30 minutes. Everyone clear on their roles? They were, because they were professionals. Because they'd fought together, bled together, and they'd be damned if they died separately. The bikes started up again, but this time they split up, heading in different directions, each with their own part to play. Creed rode alone with Hollis, heading toward the copper plant, toward the end game that had been building for 34 years. You know this might not work, Hollis said over the wind. You keep saying that, and you keep not listening. I'm listening, I just don't care. Creed downshifted for a turn, the Harley leaning into it like a living thing. Harper and Declan are in there because of me, because I dragged them into this. I'm getting them out. Even if it costs you everything, especially then. They rode in silence for a while. The desert at night was beautiful in a harsh way, all shadows and starlight. The kind of landscape that didn't care if you lived or died. It just went on, eternal and indifferent. Your brother would be proud, Hollis said finally. Emmett, he'd be proud of what you're doing. My brother's dead because I wasn't paying attention, because I was so busy building my life that I didn't notice his was falling apart. Your brother's dead because the system failed him, because people like the Brennans decided his life wasn't worth protecting. Hollis's grip tightened on Creed's waist. You can't save everyone, but you can make sure the people who cause the damage answer for it. That's what tonight is about. Not revenge, justice. The copper plant appeared on the horizon, dark against the stars. Creed could see vehicles parked around it. SUVs, black, expensive. The kind of vehicles that screamed corporate security. He killed the engine a quarter-mile out, let the Harley coast to a stop. They dismounted in silence, checking weapons, preparing for what came next. Radio check, Creed said into the comm. Team 2 in position. Bull's voice, calm despite what they were about to do. Team 3 ready, old Johnny. Teams 4 and 5 standing by. That was Flint, Pike, and the others, stationed at different points around the plant. Copy all. Hollis and I are going in. Wait for my signal. What's the signal, boss? Creed smiled in the darkness. You'll know it when you hear it. He and Hollis walked toward the plant, hands visible, no weapons drawn. They'd left the rifles with the bikes. Creed had his Colt in his waistband, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. The front entrance was lit by portable floodlights. 6 men stood guard, all armed with what looked like military-grade rifles. They tensed as Creed and Hollis approached, weapons coming up to ready positions. That's far enough, one of them said. Big guy, crew cut, probably former military himself. Mr. Brennan is expecting you, but first, we need to check for weapons. I'm armed, Creed said. Colt 1911, back of my waistband. I'll keep my hands where you can see them while you take it. They did. Professional. Quick. No unnecessary roughness. They found Hollis's pistol too, a compact Glock she'd been carrying in an ankle holster. Clear. Follow me. They were led into the plant through corridors that Creed remembered from rescuing Declan. But this time the building wasn't empty. Men were stationed at intervals, watching, waiting. Creed counted 15 visible, probably more hidden. Bad odds getting worse. The basement was lit now, powered by a generator that hummed somewhere out of sight. And in the center of the large open space, sitting in chairs like they were at a business meeting, were Harper and Declan. They were alive, bruised, but alive. Harper's lip was split, and Declan had the beginnings of a black eye, but they were breathing and conscious. That was enough. Standing beside them was Thaddeus Brennan Jr., 72 years old, gray hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the Harley Creed rode. He looked like someone's grandfather. Kind eyes, warm smile. But Creed could see past it, could see the coldness underneath, the calculation. This was a man who'd inherited his father's empire and his father's conscience, or lack thereof. Mr. Maddox, Thaddeus said warmly. Captain Vaughn, thank you for coming. I know this is all very dramatic, but I felt we needed a proper conclusion to our little conflict. Let them go, Creed said. That was the deal. All in good time. First, I think we should discuss what happens next. You've released quite a lot of damaging information. My lawyers tell me most of it won't hold up in court. Hearsay, circumstantial evidence, documents that could be forgeries. But it will cause problems. Bad publicity, investigations, inconveniences. Good. Thaddeus's smile didn't waver. I admire your conviction. My father had similar qualities. He believed in getting things done, regardless of what rules said he should follow. That's how he built this empire. That's how I've maintained it. He walked closer, hands clasped behind his back like a professor giving a lecture. But empires require maintenance. They require cleaning, removing elements that don't fit, that cause disorder. Like homeless veterans who stumble onto evidence of your crimes. Like anyone who threatens what we built. Yes. Thaddeus stopped a few feet from Creed. Your brother, for instance, Emmett, sad case. The war broke him, and the system failed him. But he was surviving, living his life such as it was. Until he found documents that my father had hidden decades ago. Then he became a problem. Creed's fists clenched. Hollis put a hand on his arm. Wait, did you know he tried to sell the documents? Thaddeus continued. He came to my office, showed them to one of my assistants, said he needed money, would give us first chance to buy them before going to the media. We could have just paid him, but then we looked into who he was. Emmett Maddox, brother of Creed Maddox, local Hells Angels boss. And we realized that if we paid him, you'd eventually find out. You'd ask questions. You'd become a problem too. So you killed him. I gave the order. Vic and his associates carried it out. Unfortunate but necessary, Thaddeus shrugged. The boy seeing it was bad luck, but bad luck can be managed. And now, here we are, managing it. By killing us, by eliminating complications. You, the captain, the boy who saw too much, the mother who asks too many questions. All of you tragically killed in what will look like a confrontation between rival criminal elements. The evidence you released will be dismissed as the desperate fabrications of a gang leader trying to deflect from his own crimes. It's already being spun that way in the media. My people are very good at their jobs. Creed looked at Harper and Declan. The boy was trying to be brave, but Creed could see the fear in his eyes. Harper was just angry, which was probably better. Before you kill us, Creed said, I want to know one thing. Alpha 6, the mission in 1991. Was that your father's decision alone, or did you help? Thaddeus's smile widened. I was a young man then, fresh out of business school. My father brought me into the family business, both the legitimate side and the other side, the side where real money was made. He explained that Alpha 6 was getting too close to our operations, that they needed to be dealt with. I suggested the trap. He executed it. Call it a collaboration. Hollis stepped forward. You killed 5 soldiers because they were doing their jobs, because they believed in honor and duty and all the things you've never understood. I killed 5 soldiers because they threatened my family's livelihood. Just as I'm about to kill you because you threaten it now. It's nothing personal. It's just business. It's always personal, Creed said. That's what people like you never understand. He raised his hand, made a gesture, just a small one, and the world exploded into light. Not literally, but every floodlight in the building cut out simultaneously, plunging the basement into darkness. Bull's team had found the generator right on schedule. Creed moved, muscle memory from 34 years ago taking over. 3 steps to the left, dropping low. Behind him, he heard Hollis doing the same, moving to cover. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes in the darkness like lightning. But the Brennan security guards were shooting blind, firing at where Creed and Hollis had been, not where they were. Return fire came from the upper level. Flint and his team, positioned before Creed and Hollis had even walked in, waiting for exactly this moment. Precise shots, professional work. Not shooting to kill, but shooting to suppress, keeping the security team pinned down. Creed low-crawled across the concrete floor, navigating by memory, by instinct, by the training that had kept him alive in worse situations. He found Harper and Declan right where they'd been, still tied to their chairs. Stay down, he whispered, pulling out his pocket knife, cutting through the zip ties. Mr. Maddox, Harper started. Later, right now, run. He pushed them toward where he remembered the stairs being. More gunfire, someone screaming, the acrid smell of gunpowder and fear. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, finding Creed. He rolled left, heard bullets impact concrete where he'd been. Came up firing his Colt, 2 rounds center mass. The flashlight dropped, went out. All teams, extract, he shouted into the comm. Package secured. He ran, following Harper and Declan up the stairs, Hollis covering their rear. Behind them, the Brennans security team was regrouping, finding their own lights, returning fire with more accuracy. But they were too late. Creed's team had done what they came to do. Harper and Declan were out, running toward the bikes that old Johnny had moved into position, while everyone was focused on the basement. Creed emerged into the night air, breathing hard, adrenaline singing through his veins. All around the plant, he could see his brothers extracting, fading into the desert night like ghosts. But something was wrong. He could feel it. A single gunshot, different from the others, sharper, more precise. Hollis stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. "You hit?" Creed asked, catching her arm. "It's nothing. Keep moving." But there was blood, dark against her tactical gear. Too much blood. They made it to the bikes. Creed helped Hollis onto his Harley, could feel her weight sagging against him. The others were already leaving, engines roaring, scattering in different directions like they'd planned. "Go," Hollis said. "Get them out." Creed twisted the throttle. The Harley leaped forward, carrying them away from the plant, away from the gunfire, in the chaos, and the men who'd been willing to kill to protect their secrets. Behind them, he could hear vehicles starting. The chase would come. But for now, they'd won. Harper and Declan were safe. The evidence was out there, spreading faster than anyone could stop it. And Thaddeus Brennan Jr. had just admitted to multiple murders on what he didn't know was a live audio feed, broadcast to the same platforms that were hosting all the other evidence. Creed had been wearing a wire the entire time. Old Johnny, tech-savvy despite his age, had been streaming it all. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Creed felt Hollis's grip loosening. He pulled over, eased her down onto the ground. In the moonlight, he could see the wound. Through and through, just above her left hip. Serious but not immediately fatal if she got medical attention. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. We need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals. They'll be watching them." "Then you're going to bleed out." Hollis smiled, blood on her teeth. "Wouldn't be the first time I should have died. Captain Vaughn was supposed to die in Iraq, remember? Maybe she's just been living on borrowed time." "Stop talking like that." The comm unit crackled. "Boss, we've got multiple police units converging on the plant, and I'm seeing news choppers. It's turning into a circus." Creed looked toward the horizon. He could see lights, lots of them. The story was too big to contain now. The evidence, the confession, all of it broadcast live to thousands of people who'd shared it thousands more times. The Brennans were done. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the rot had been exposed, and eventually it would be cut out. "There's a clinic," Hollis said, her voice weak. 15 miles east. Guy there owes me a favor. He'll patch me up, no questions." Creed helped her back onto the bike. She was lighter than she should have been, all the weight she'd lost living as a ghost for 34 years. They rode through the desert, following roads that turned to dirt, that turned to barely visible trails. The clinic was exactly where Hollis said it would be, a small building that looked abandoned but had lights on in the back. The doctor was an old man, 70 if he was a day, who took one look at Hollis and didn't ask a single question. Just got to work with steady hands that had probably seen worse. While he worked, Creed stepped outside, pulled out his phone, called Sheriff Keller. "Boone, it's Creed." "Jesus Christ, Creed, where are you? The whole state's looking for you. There's footage of a firefight at the old copper plant in..." "Harper and Declan Morrison are safe. They're with my people. They'll need protection, official protection, until this all shakes out." "What the hell did you do?" "What needed doing. Brennan's finished. You've seen the evidence?" "Half the state's seen the evidence. The Attorney General's already calling for an emergency investigation. FBI's getting involved. Creed, they're also looking for you for about 15 different felonies." "Yeah, I figured." Creed lit a cigarette, watched the smoke drift up toward the stars. "I'm going to disappear for a while. Let things settle. When the time's right, I'll turn myself in, but not until I know Harper and Declan are safe. I can protect them, you have my word." "Good, because if anything happens to them, Boone, if they get so much as a parking ticket from someone on Brennan's payroll, I'm going to be very unhappy." "Understood. Where's the old woman, Captain Vaughn?" "Getting medical attention. She'll reach out when she's ready." "Creed, I have to go, Boone. Take care of them." He hung up before the sheriff could respond. went back inside. The doctor was finishing up, wrapping bandages around Hollis's torso. She looked pale, but alive. "She'll make it," the doctor said. "But she needs rest, real rest, no more running." "I've been running for 34 years, Hollis said. "I think I've earned a break." The doctor left them alone. Creed pulled up a chair, sat down beside the table where Hollis was lying. "We did it," she said. "Alpha 6, we finally got them." "Yeah, we did. The others, Webb, Cross, Rivera, Morrison, Bradford, they can rest now." Creed thought about the 5 men in that photograph, young faces, dead faces. "You think they're watching, wherever they are?" "I hope so. I hope they know we didn't forget them." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. A new day, a new beginning. "What will you do now?" Hollis asked. "I don't know. Depends on how badly they want to prosecute me. I broke a lot of laws tonight." "You saved lives, exposed corruption, brought down a criminal empire." "Yeah, but I also committed breaking and entering, assault, probably something that could be spun as terrorism if they wanted to push it." Creed shrugged. "I'll deal with it. I always do." "You could run, disappear like I did. I could teach you how." "No, I'm done running. Done hiding. If they want to put me in prison for doing the right thing, then that's what happens. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Hollis reached out, took his hand. Hers was cold, but her grip was strong. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me finish this. Thank you for keeping watch, for protecting me all these years, even though I didn't know it. That's what soldiers do. We protect each other, even after the war ends." 2 days later, Creed Maddox walked into the state police headquarters in Phoenix and surrendered. The media circus was everything he'd expected and worse. Cameras, reporters, questions shouted from every direction. But he didn't answer them. Just walked inside with his hands up, let them cuff him, let them process him into the system. The charges were serious: breaking and entering, assault, theft of digital records, unlawful use of force, a dozen others. Together they added up to decades in prison if convicted on all counts. But something funny happened on the way to prosecution. The evidence Creed had released kept spreading. Independent journalists verified the documents. Forensic accountants traced the money. Former employees of Brennan companies came forward with their own stories of corruption and abuse. The video confession of Thaddeus Brennan Jr., admitting to ordering Emmett Maddox's murder, went viral. Tens of millions of views. The Attorney General couldn't ignore it. Neither could the FBI. Within a week, Thaddeus Brennan Jr., Vic Maloney, and 17 other associates were arrested on charges ranging from murder to racketeering to corruption of public officials. The public defender assigned to Creed's case was a young woman fresh out of law school who believed in justice with the kind of passion that hadn't been corrupted yet. She argued that Creed's actions, while technically illegal, had been necessary to expose crimes that law enforcement had failed to investigate. That he was a whistleblower, not a criminal. The prosecutor, under pressure from a public that had decided Creed was a hero, offered a deal. Plead guilty to misdemeanor trespassing, time served plus probation, no felonies, no prison. Creed took it. 3 months after walking into that police station, he walked back out a free man. Harper and Declan were waiting for him. So were Flint, Bull, Old Johnny, and the rest of the brothers who'd stood with him when it mattered. And sitting on a bench near the entrance, wearing civilian clothes and looking nothing like a beggar, was Hollis Vaughn. "Captain," Creed said, "just Hollis now. I'm officially retired." She stood, moved with only a slight limp from the gunshot wound. "The Army reinstated my rank, issued an apology for the things that happened in 1991, even gave me a medal, though that's not what I wanted." "What did you want?" "I wanted Alpha 6 to be remembered, to have their names cleared. And now they are. There's a memorial being built. 6 names, 5 who died in service, 1 who survived to tell their story. Creed felt his throat tighten. They'd be proud of you, of what you did, of what we did. They walked together toward the parking lot where 15 Harleys waited, engines rumbling. Creed swung onto his bike, felt the familiar weight, the familiar vibration. Home. This was home, not a building, not a place, but this, the bike, the brothers, the open road stretching out toward the horizon. "Where to, boss?" Flint asked. Creed thought about it. About Emmett, who he'd failed to save but had finally gotten justice for. About the 5 members of Alpha 6 who could finally rest. About promises kept and debts paid. "Millbrook," he said. "Home." They rode through Phoenix, a convoy of 15 bikes that drew stares and waves, and the kind of attention that came with being part of something bigger than yourself. Out of the city, onto the highway, into the desert where the sky was endless and the road was straight. Beside Creed, riding her own Harley that she'd bought with the back pay the Army had given her, was Hollis. No longer Captain Vaughn, just Hollis, a woman who'd spent 34 years as a ghost and was finally learning to be alive again. "You know they'll make a movie about this," she shouted over the wind. "They better cast someone good-looking to play me," Creed shouted back. She laughed, a sound he'd never heard from her before. Pure, free, the laugh of someone who'd laid down a burden she'd been carrying for more than 3 decades. Millbrook appeared on the horizon as the sun began to set. The town looked the same as it always had, small, weathered, struggling to survive. But there was something different now. Hope, maybe. Or just the knowledge that corruption could be exposed, that justice could be served, that ordinary people could stand up to power and win. The garage was exactly as Creed had left it. Flint had kept it running while he was gone, fixing bikes and managing the business like it was his own. The office was clean. The tools were organized. And on the wall, the picture of Alpha 6 still hung. 6 young faces staring out at a future they'd never get to see. Creed stood looking at it for a long time. Then he reached up and took it down, placed it in a drawer. Not forgotten, never forgotten. But it was time to stop looking backward. On the wall where the picture had been, he hung something else. A photo from 2 days ago, taken by a reporter who'd been covering his release. 15 bikers standing together. Brothers. Family. And among them, standing tall despite everything she'd been through, was Hollis Vaughn. No longer invisible, no longer a ghost, just a soldier who'd finally come home. That night, the whole town turned out for a celebration at the Iron's Den. Not just the Hells Angels, but everyone. The people the Brennans had exploited, the families they'd hurt, the workers they'd cheated. Harper Morrison was there with Declan, who'd become something of a local celebrity for his bravery. The boy was already talking about joining the military when he was old enough, about serving with honor the way his heroes had. Sheriff Keller came, off duty, and shook Creed's hand with genuine respect. "You did what I couldn't," he said. "Made this town believe in justice again. We did it together, all of us." As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Creed stepped outside for some air. The desert night was cool, the stars bright enough to read by if you knew how to look. Hollis joined him, 2 beers in hand. She passed him one. "To Alpha 6, she said, raising her bottle. "To Alpha 6, Creed echoed, "and to promises kept." They drank in silence, standing side by side, 2 soldiers who'd fought a war that had never really ended until now. "What will you do?" Creed asked. "Now that it's over?" "Thought I might stick around. Millbrook could use someone with my skill set, and I've been alone long enough," Hollis smiled. "Besides, someone needs to keep you out of trouble." "Pretty sure I'm the one who keeps everyone else out of trouble." "Keep telling yourself that." They laughed. And in that laughter was something new. Not just relief or release, but the possibility of a future that wasn't defined by the past. Inside the bar, someone started playing music. classic rock, the kind that spoke to men who'd lived hard and loved harder. Creed could hear his brothers singing along, off-key but enthusiastic. This was what he'd fought for. Not revenge, not even justice, really. This. Community, family, the right to live free from fear, from corruption, from people who thought power meant they were above the law. Emmett would have liked this, Creed thought, would have stood here with a beer in his hand, listening to bad singing and worse jokes, surrounded by people who cared. And maybe, somewhere, he was watching. Along with Webb, Cross, Rivera, Morrison, and Bradford. 6 soldiers who'd believed in something bigger than themselves. 6 soldiers who'd finally been honored the way they deserved. The night stretched on, the celebration continued, and Creed Maddox, 65 years old, stood in the doorway of his bar and felt something he hadn't felt in 34 years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose fulfilled. Promises kept, justice served. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Brennan empire would fight back through lawyers and appeals. The media would move on to newer stories. Life would return to something resembling normal. But tonight, in this moment, standing under the Arizona stars with his brothers around him, in a future that finally looked bright, Creed Maddox was exactly where he needed to be. Home.